lights on. Join me, hun. We'll have some fun with.
It's very nice to meet you.
Do you remember being a teenager? The freedom, the awkwardness, the moments you thought you'd never forget. In the 1970s, it meant first jobs, crushes, and living loud in a wide-open world. But looking back now, why does it all feel like a distant dream we barely held on to? There was no better place to be than the mall. Not because you needed to buy anything, but because that is where everything happened. It was where you scoped out your crush, split a soft pretzel with your best friend, and maybe begged your parents for a few quarters for the arcade. In the 1970s, suburban malls were exploding in size and popularity, and for teenagers, they were sacred ground. It had everything: food courts with greasy fries, record shops blasting Led Zeppelin, and department stores where you tried on outfits you had no plans to buy. You would walk those shiny tiled floors until your feet ached and still find yourself circling back to the same 2 or 3 stores. Maybe you caught a movie. Maybe you just wandered aimlessly for hours because it felt like freedom. No cell phones, no way to track you. Just you, your friends, and whatever mischief you could dream up between Spencer's Gifts and the escalator. Looking back, it was not about the shopping. It was about feeling grown up in a space that pretended to be the real world. In a decade when teens were starting to find their voice, the mall was where that voice got a little louder. If you were lucky enough to have your own ride, or just a friend who did, then you know the magic of the 8-track tape. That clunky plastic cartridge snapping into the dashboard like you were launching a space mission. The whir of the tape kicking in. The music blaring from cheap speakers that made everything sound like it was recorded underwater. But you did not care. This was your soundtrack. Maybe it was Fleetwood Mac, or the Rolling Stones, or that one song you rewound again and again just to feel something. It was messy, sure. The tape would switch tracks mid-song without warning. Sometimes it would get stuck and melt in the heat. But it was yours. In a world before streaming, before playlists, before carrying your entire music library in your pocket, this was it. You blasted it with the windows down, your arm out the side, fingers slicing the wind. Every drive felt like a scene from a movie. You were not going anywhere important, but the music made it feel like you were. The 8-track was not just about listening, it was about becoming. Finding yourself between fuzzy choruses and that familiar click as it looped back to the beginning. Before binge-watching existed, before algorithms decided what you liked, there was one show that made everything feel okay. Happy Days. It came on just when you needed it, after a long day of school, after too much homework, after you had just been grounded for coming home late. You would sink into the couch, maybe with a bowl of cereal or a soda, and there they were, Richie, Potsy, and the Fonz. A crew of characters living in a cleaner, simpler version of the 1950s. One that somehow made the 1970s feel just a little less chaotic. You knew every catchphrase. You knew exactly when the laugh track would kick in. And when Fonzie hit the jukebox and it actually worked, you believed it could work for you too. Happy Days was more than a TV show. It was comfort, familiar, warm, a place where the problems always got solved in 30 minutes or less. And for a teenager trying to figure life out, that was a miracle. Looking back, it was kind of genius. A nostalgic show about the past that became a core memory of the present. For 1/2 hour, everything was cool. Everything was all right. And everything felt like it was going to be just fine. There was no freedom quite like a bike in the 1970s. No schedule, no helmet, just you and your rusted 10-speed flying down the sidewalk like you had somewhere to be. You did not. That was the point. You pedaled to the store for gum, to your friend's house just to hang. You rode in packs, racing down hills, throwing your hands in the air like Evel Knievel. Nobody tracked your location. Your parents did not panic if you disappeared for a few hours. Be home by dark, they said. So you kept one eye on the sun, one on the road, and hoped you made it back before the streetlights flickered on. It was pure, unsupervised childhood. Scraped knees, popped tires, cardboard in the spokes to make it sound like a motorcycle. Sometimes your bike broke down and you just walked it the rest of the way, talking about everything and nothing with whoever stuck by you. It was never about the destination. It was about how far you could go before someone called you home. You were not just riding a bike. You were becoming your own person. Every block was yours to conquer. Every shortcut became a story. In the 1970s, your bike was your first taste of independence, and maybe your last for a while. And as the sun dipped low and you coasted into the driveway, you felt bigger than you were. That kind of freedom, you never really forget it. In the 1970s, your locker was not just where you kept your books, it was your billboard. And if you were a teenager back then, chances are David Cassidy was front and center, smiling, dreamy, hair feathered to perfection. You might have first seen him on The Partridge Family, but after that it was game over. You were in love, not in a silly, passing way, but in that deep, unshakable, totally irrational teen kind of love. You tore his picture out of magazines, carefully folded it, taped it up inside your locker next to stickers, notes, and maybe a photo booth strip with your best friend. It was a shrine, a tiny 12-inch wide expression of who you were or who you wanted to be. If someone else had the same poster, it sparked an instant bond. You were part of a secret club that understood what real heartthrob loyalty meant. And if anyone made fun of it, you defended David like he was your actual boyfriend. For those few minutes between classes, opening that locker felt like opening a little window into a better world. A world where your favorite songs played non-stop, where crushes always liked you back, and where David Cassidy was just waiting to notice you. It was harmless. It was obsessive. It was perfect. Looking back, it is easy to laugh. But those little things meant everything. And for some of us, they still do. The shoes were weird. Let's just get that out of the way. They looked strange, they felt strange, but that was the point. In the 1970s, fashion was about making a statement, and your feet got the memo. Earth shoes with their negative heel. Platforms that added 3 inches to your height and doubled your chance of twisting an ankle. Teens wore them anyway, because they were different, because they were bold, and because everyone else was doing it. You would clomp through the hallways of your high school like you were on a fashion runway, or at least that is how it felt. You could not sneak up on anyone. The echo of those heels announced your arrival 5 seconds ahead of you. But somehow, that loud clack was part of the power. Your mom called them impractical. Your dad shook his head. But you did not care. These shoes made you feel taller, cooler, louder. You strutted, you stumbled, you survived. And if you were really daring, you paired them with flared jeans and a fringe vest, turning your walk to class into a full-blown event. Looking back, maybe they were not the most sensible shoes, but they carried you through some unforgettable years, one uncomfortable, fabulous step at a time. It smelled like grease and teenage freedom. Your first job, maybe it was a burger joint, maybe a fried chicken place. You wore a polyester uniform, punched in on a mechanical time clock, and spent the next 6 hours learning what it meant to really work. You burned your fingers on the fryer, you memorized the register buttons, you smiled at rude customers and cleaned things that no one should ever have to clean. But you did it. For $2 an hour and a free soda at the end of your shift. In the 1970s, getting your first job was a rite of passage. Not just about money, but about growing up. Earning something. Standing behind that counter gave you confidence. And maybe a few blisters. You learned how to talk to strangers, how to count back change without a calculator, and how to fake a smile when someone was yelling at you over soggy fries. These jobs weren't glamorous, but they were real. And they taught you more than school ever could. You made friends with coworkers who became your second family. You learned what it meant to take orders, and when it was okay to bend the rules. And even when you swore you would never eat another fry again, part of you loved it, because it was yours. That job was where you first learned to stand on your own. One shift at a time. The screen lit up, the static speakers crackled, and you knew you were in for something special. Going to the drive-in was not just about the movie, it was about the moment, You crammed into the back of someone's car or sprawled on a blanket with popcorn you smuggled in from home. The movie barely mattered. Sometimes you watched. Sometimes you whispered through the whole thing, passing soda cans and candy bars while trying not to get caught. The smell of summer air, the sound of crickets in the background, it all blended into a night that felt endless. In the 1970s, the drive-in was freedom. No parents hovering, no theater usher flashing a light in your face. Just you, your friends, and a glowing screen under the stars. You could talk, you could laugh, you could fall asleep halfway through the double feature and no one cared. You were not just watching a film, you were living inside one, wrapped in a warm night and cheap snacks and everything that felt right. Even the fog on the windshield felt cinematic. Because you were together, because you were young, and because those nights had a kind of magic that never made it onto the marquee. Before phones, before messages popped up on screens, there were notes, handwritten, folded into perfect triangles, slipped quietly across desks like tiny sacred secrets. Do you like him? Circle yes or no. Want to hang out after school? You would risk everything to pass one. A teacher's glare, a detention, maybe even getting your note read out loud. But you did it anyway, because you had something to say and no other way to say it. The paper was lined, the ink always smudged. Sometimes the words were crossed out and rewritten 3 times before it felt right. And when someone passed one to you, it meant the world. A joke, a doodle, a question that made your stomach twist. These notes were how teenagers communicated when nobody else was watching. It was raw, personal, real. You kept them in your locker, in your pockets, or folded inside your diary. Some of us still have them, stashed in a box somewhere, yellowed and soft at the edges. A little piece of who we were, passed hand to hand. Long before group chats and emojis, friendship lived on the landline. You would stretch the phone cord down the hallway, shut yourself in the bathroom, and talk for hours. It did not matter what about. Nothing and everything. Who liked who? What your parents did this time. Whether the English quiz was going to be as bad as everyone said. In the 1970s, calling your friend meant dialing each number, slowly, hoping they picked up, hoping their dad did not answer. And if the line was busy, you waited. And waited. Because there was no voicemail, no second option. And when the line finally rang through and you heard their voice, it was like coming home. You talked lying on the floor. You talked while doodling in your notebook. Sometimes you said nothing, just breathed on the line together. These were not quick calls. They were lifelines, tethering one teenager to another across the static of everyday life. And when your mom finally shouted, "Get off the phone," it meant the night was over. But not the friendship. That connection lasted long after you hung up. The moment your skates hit the floor, everything else faded away. The lights dimmed, the disco ball spun, and the speakers pumped out the soundtrack of your teenage life. In the 1970s, the roller rink was more than a hangout. It was a scene. The place you went to meet friends, flirt with your crush, and maybe try out that one spin move you saw someone else nail the week before. The smell of popcorn and rental spray mixed with the thump of bass and the screech of wheels. You held sweaty hands during couples skate. You wiped out in front of a crowd. You laughed so hard, you almost fell again. And when the lights shifted to a slow song, your heart raced in your chest, hoping someone would roll over and ask you to dance. This was not just a place to skate. It was a place to be seen, a place to belong. You spent your allowance on a soda and a slice of pizza. You watched older kids glide by like they owned the place, and you thought maybe someday that would be you. Your outfit mattered, your moves mattered, but mostly just being there mattered. Because the rink was where you figured yourself out, one lap at a time. Walking into the record store felt like entering a different world. Rows and rows of cardboard sleeves, each one a doorway to a sound, a feeling, a moment you had not lived yet, but already knew you needed. The air smelled like plastic and paper and possibility. You flipped through bins with your fingertips, letting the covers speak to you. Bowie, Stevie Wonder, the Eagles. Some names you knew, some you pretended to. Each trip was a treasure hunt. In the 1970s, teenagers did not just listen to music. They discovered it, held it, studied the liner notes like sacred text. Your favorite albums were not just things you played. They were pieces of you. You brought them home, unwrapped them like a gift, and dropped the needle with reverence. You waited for that first crackle before the sound poured out. Sometimes you listened with friends, sometimes alone, lights off, staring at the ceiling, letting the music say everything you could not. Saving up to buy a new record meant making choices, passing on candy, skipping a movie, maybe even mowing a few lawns. But it was always worth it, because what you got was more than sound. It was identity, it was escape, and it was yours. The whole week led up to Friday night. Whether you cared about football or not did not matter. The game was just the excuse. The real show was in the stands, under the lights, with the smell of popcorn in the air and the band marching loud and proud across the field. You showed up early to save seats with your friends. You wore your school colors like armor, cheered when everyone else did, even if you had no clue what just happened. In the 1970s, high school football games were the stage for teenage life. Crushes bloomed in the bleachers. Gossip flew faster than the football. Pep rallies in the gym that afternoon had already pumped everyone up, with cheerleaders tossing pom-poms and the principal trying too hard to be cool. The whole town seemed to show up. Parents, teachers, former students. It made you feel like you were part of something bigger, something that mattered. Even if your team lost, you would still pile into someone's car afterward and head to the diner, or just cruise around, still buzzing from the night. For a few hours, the future did not exist. Just bright lights, loud cheers, and the feeling that this, right here, was what being young was all about. There was nothing quite like designing your own shirt, walking into the t-shirt shop, scanning the racks for that perfect iron-on decal, a glittery smiley face, a band logo, a ridiculous slogan that made 0 sense but sounded cool anyway. In the 1970s, this was how you made a statement. Not on social media, not through a profile picture, but on cotton, in bold block letters, right across your chest. You picked out the color, the size, the decal, and watched as the shop clerk pressed it with that giant heat press, steam rising up like it was fresh from a forge. Then you wore it out like it was high fashion. Because to you, it was. It was your taste, your humor, your identity. You matched with friends, you clashed with siblings, you washed it carefully, hoping the decal would not peel. And when it finally did, you saved it anyway. Because that shirt was more than just something you wore. It was a memory, a statement, a time capsule. In a world before customization came with a click, iron-on t-shirts gave you the power to say who you were without saying a word. Every Saturday, you knew exactly where to be, right in front of the television, volume up, watching teenagers just like you dance live on national television. American Bandstand was more than just a show. It was a movement. Hosted by Dick Clark with his perfect hair and easy charm, it made you believe anything was possible. The music was new, the energy electric. It brought the hottest records straight into your living room and showed you how to move to them. You would watch the dancers closely, what they wore, how they stepped, and then try to copy it the next time you were out. In the 1970s, Bandstand was the cultural compass. It set trends, it shaped playlists, and most importantly, it made you feel connected to something bigger than your town or your school. Watching it felt like being part of a club where everyone was young, wild, and ready to dance. It was the original social network. No comments section, no filters, just rhythm and style and sweat. You would hum the songs for the rest of the day. You would dream about being one of those kids on screen, and for that hour, you were. The line wrapped around the block. You were not even sure what you were waiting for, but everyone said it was going to change everything. In 1977, Star Wars was not just a movie. It was an event. You stood with your friends, nervous with excitement, wondering how a space movie could be that good. Some kids came dressed in makeshift costumes. Others just held onto their ticket stubs like they were gold. You waited, and waited. And when the doors finally opened, it felt like stepping into another universe. Lightsabers, spaceships, a villain in all black whose breathing haunted your dreams. It was loud. It was fast. It was unlike anything you had ever seen before. And the moment it ended, you knew you had to see it again. It was not just about the story. It was about what it made you feel. Like the world had just gotten bigger. You bought the action figures. You argued over who was cooler, Han Solo or Luke Skywalker. And for weeks afterward, kids would hum the theme in the hallways, turning pencils into blasters and backpacks into spaceships. That first time, unforgettable. Because that movie did not just blow your mind, it changed the world. It sat there in the glass case, glowing like a little mystery. A mood ring. In the 1970s, it was more than jewelry. It was magic. You were told it could read your emotions, shift color with your feelings, tell the truth when even you could not. Blue for calm, black for nervous, green for whatever you were pretending to feel that day. You saved for weeks, dug through couch cushions, skipped snacks at school, and when you finally had enough, you walked to that kiosk and picked out the perfect one, slipped it on your finger and stared, waiting for it to tell you something deep about yourself. Of course, it never really worked the way the ads claimed. But that was not the point. It made you feel seen. Like maybe you were not just a jumble of hormones and daydreams, but someone whose feelings mattered enough to change colors. You showed it off to friends. You compared shades. You panicked when it turned black and laughed when it turned red. It was silly, it was fun, and it was yours. A little mood tracker from a decade that was all about discovering who you really were. You could hear them before you saw them. The swish of fabric, the jingle of fringe, the confidence in every step. Bell-bottoms and fringed vests were not just fashion, they were rebellion. A statement, a shrug to convention. You wore them even if your parents begged you not to. You wore them to school dances, concerts, and just because it was Tuesday. The wider the flare, the cooler the kid. The fringe had to be just right. Long enough to move when you walked, short enough to keep from dipping into your lunch tray. You did not buy these clothes to blend in. You bought them to stand out. Or maybe to finally feel like you fit in. This was the 1970s, after all. Everything was loud, from the music to the patterns to the personalities. Fashion followed suit. These outfits were inspired by music festivals, freedom marches, and late-night TV. They felt electric. And when you caught your reflection in a storefront window, just for a second, you believed you were exactly who you wanted to be. A little bold, a little weird, and 100% unforgettable. The poster hung on bedroom walls across the country. That smile, that hair. Farrah Fawcett became the icon of beauty, and suddenly everyone wanted the look. In the 1970s, hair was not just style, it was power. You sprayed, curled, feathered, and fluffed until your arms ached. Hairspray cans ran dry trying to get that perfect swoop. It never looked quite like hers, but that did not stop anyone from trying. You begged your mom to let you grow it out. You studied magazine photos like they held sacred wisdom. You experimented with mousse and hot rollers, burned your forehead more than once with a curling iron, and every time you caught even a hint of that feathered flip in the mirror, you felt unstoppable. Boys tried it too. That effortless swoosh became a shared obsession. It was not just about copying a celebrity. It was about becoming someone confident, cool, admired. You would walk into school, head held high, hoping someone noticed. Sometimes they did, sometimes they laughed. Either way, it was worth it, because that hair was more than a style. It was a shot at something bigger, at being seen, at standing out, at feeling a little bit like a star. There was no greater treasure than getting your hands on the latest issue of Dynamite magazine. It came packed with everything a 1970s kid needed: jokes, puzzles, celebrity posters, and just enough gossip to make it feel dangerous. You read it cover to cover, sometimes twice. You peeled out the centerfold and hung it on your wall. You circled contests you never entered and answered quizzes about your favorite TV stars like it was a test that actually mattered. Dynamite was bright, loud, and bursting with energy. just like you. It was the magazine of the moment, the one you looked for at the drugstore or begged for in the checkout line. Your teachers hated when you smuggled it into class. Your friends borrowed it before you had finished reading. It was a shared language, a pop culture pipeline, a ticket into the conversation. You would trade back issues like baseball cards, dog-ear the pages, memorize your horoscope, even if you barely knew what a horoscope was. And in those glossy pages, you felt seen. Not by adults, not by teachers, but by something that understood what it meant to be a teenager in a loud, weird, exciting world. You told yourself you would start studying a week early. You always did, but here you were. Midnight, 3 pages of notes, a cold soda, and rumors spinning in the background. In the 1970s, Fleetwood Mac was more than just music. It was mood, Lindsay's guitar, Stevie's voice. It all felt like a spell being cast while you tried to memorize algebra formulas or historical timelines. You underlined sentences. You scribbled things on flashcards. You swore you would stay up all night if you had to. That haunting echo of "the chain" kept you grounded. Or maybe it just kept you from completely falling apart. Cramming was a ritual. You sat on your bedroom floor with textbooks open, highlighter caps everywhere, and your Walkman turned all the way up. Sometimes your friends were with you, pretending to quiz each other between fits of laughter and microwave popcorn. Other times it was just you and the hum of late-night radio, trying to make sense of a semester's worth of knowledge. You knew you were not going to remember half of it, but still, you tried. And when you walked into that classroom the next day with 3 hours of sleep and Fleetwood Mac still echoing in your head, you felt like maybe, just maybe, you could fake your way through. It was chaotic, it was stressful, but it was yours. The seatbelt barely worked. The turn signal stuck unless you yanked it twice, and the engine coughed every time you hit the gas. But that was the car you took your driver's test in because it was the only one you had. In the 1970s, learning to drive meant getting behind the wheel of something that had seen better days and somehow making it work. Your palms sweated against the plastic steering wheel. The examiner sat there, clipboard in hand, stone-faced. You tried to act confident, like you did not just stall at the stop sign 2 blocks back. You parallel parked like your life depended on it. Because honestly, it kind of did. Getting your license was not just about driving. It was freedom. It was late-night milkshake runs. It was blasting the radio with no one telling you to turn it down. Passing that test, especially in a car that groaned at every red light, was a badge of honor. And even if you failed the first time or the second, you kept trying, because you could taste what was on the other side of that laminated card. A life that was just a little more yours, a little less controlled, a little more wide open. There was only one rule on Saturday: wake up early, before the sun, before your parents, before your siblings could steal the remote, because Saturday morning was sacred. It was cartoon time. You poured yourself a bowl of cereal, whatever was most colorful, and plopped down in front of the television in your pajamas. In the 1970s, this was the golden window. A few glorious hours where the world was yours. Scooby-Doo, Fat Albert, Super Friends. They were not just shows, they were appointments. You knew exactly what came on when, and you timed your bathroom breaks accordingly. The animation was clunky, the jokes were corny, but it did not matter. It was your time to laugh, to forget about homework, and to just be a kid. No commercials trying to sell you on college or responsibility, just toys, sugar cereal, and superheroes who always saved the day. Sometimes your parents would shuffle in, coffee in hand, confused about why you were so awake. You barely looked up. You were in your world, the one that only existed on Saturday morning. And when the shows ended and the news came on, you knew it was over. The spell had broken. But for those few hours, everything felt just right. The school bell rang and you were gone. Backpack half-zipped, feet pounding the sidewalk or school bus aisle. Because you had to get home in time for the Brady Bunch. In the 1970s, reruns of That Perfect Family were like comfort food. You already knew the episodes by heart. Marcia's drama, Jan's complaints, Greg's hair. But it never got old. It was the kind of show that made the world feel a little safer, a little funnier. a little easier. You would sit cross-legged on the carpet, eyes locked to the screen, mouthing lines before the characters even said them. You laughed when Peter's voice cracked. You rolled your eyes when Bobby messed something up. And you waited for Alice's wisecrack like it was the punchline to your own day. These were not your real siblings, but they might as well have been. For a half hour, your living room turned into their split-level home. You knew it was all pretend, but it still felt like a place you could go, where problems were small and always solved with a hug. Watching those reruns after school was more than a habit. It was a reminder that even if your life was a little messier, everything could still turn out all right. Breaker 19. Remember that? In the 1970s, CB radios were not just for truckers. They were for anyone with a call sign and something to say. Teens across the country were wiring up their bedrooms and family cars to join in. It was the original chat room. Static-filled conversations with people you had never met, using voices you might never recognize. You picked a handle, something cool, something mysterious. Bluebird, Roadrunner, Midnight Fox. It was your new identity, broadcast across the airwaves. You learned the lingo. 10-4, good buddy. Copy that. What's your 20? You asked about the weather, joked about school, shared songs, made friends. Some nights you stayed up late just listening, waiting for someone new to hop on, for a stranger's voice to light up your speaker with a story from a town you had never been to. It felt like traveling without ever leaving your room. And in a time before texts, before internet, before any kind of digital anything, it felt electric. CB radio gave you a way to connect, to escape, to feel like part of something bigger. You never knew who would answer your call, but you kept calling anyway, because those airwaves made the world feel just a little closer. The strip mall pet store did not smell like adventure. It smelled like wood shavings and fish food. But when Dad said, "Let's stop in for a minute," you knew it meant 20. The walls were lined with glass tanks full of turtles, frogs, and fish that looked too bright to be real. You would press your nose against the glass and point. "That one. I want that one." Dad would shake his head and smile. "We're not getting a turtle." 5 minutes later, you were holding a goldfish in a plastic bag, trying not to spill it on the seat of the car. He was not a pushover. He just knew the power of a memory. And that pet store, as humble as it was, felt like a mini zoo to you. There was always one sleepy lizard under a heat lamp and a parrot that squawked like a broken doorbell. Sometimes you would hear, "Hey there," from across the room and realize the bird was mocking you. Dad would strike up a conversation with the guy behind the counter like they were old war buddies, swapping advice on filters and food pellets. You would head home with a tank, a packet of food, and a new responsibility you were not quite ready for. And when you were ready for something outdoorsy, Dad knew just the place, with canoes and no life jackets in sight. Waterbeds promised the future and delivered waves of regret. On paper, they were perfect, a heated mattress that cradled your body like a floating dream. But in practice, not so much. Every turn sent ripples across the surface. You tried to roll over, and the whole bed sloshed like a bathtub during an earthquake. Getting in without making a tidal wave was a skill. Getting out without sliding to the floor was an Olympic event. They were heavy, hard to move, and leaked at the worst times, usually at 3 in the morning, soaking everything from socks to shag carpet. Still, they were trendy. If someone had a waterbed, it meant they were either incredibly cool or easily convinced by an in-store demo. Some people swore by them. Others swore at them. Pets hated them. Kids loved jumping on them until they learned that waterbeds and sharp objects do not mix. But for a brief, glorious window in the 1980s, having a waterbed meant you had arrived. It was furniture and flex all in one. Looking back, they were impractical, ridiculous, and unforgettable. And somewhere, in a dusty corner of a basement, one is still gently sloshing, waiting for its comeback. Playgrounds used to be a little more dangerous, and the metal slide on asphalt was the crown jewel of poor design. In the 1970s, nearly every school or park had one. It stood tall, often 2 stories high, baking in the sun until it could sear the back of your legs. No shade, no padding, just you, gravity, and a prayer. The steps up were made of thin metal bars. The top had no real guardrails, and when you slid down, you hit that blacktop like a dropped steak. But we lined up for it anyway, over and over. There was something thrilling about the danger. It was a rite of passage, a fast, hot, jolting ride that ended in a dusty scrape or bruised elbow. Teachers watched from afar. Parents shrugged. Kids were expected to bounce back. If you made it to the bottom without a scream, you earned bragging rights. If you got burned, you wore it like a badge. Safety standards have come a long way since then, but so much of that fearless, feral childhood play was tied to moments like these. Today, it is hard to believe we once thought that was normal, but deep down, part of us misses it. G.I. Joe changed everything the moment he marched onto toy shelves in 1964. Marketed not as a doll, but as an action figure, he offered boys the same kind of character-driven play that girls had with Barbie, but with a combat boot twist. The original 12-inch figure came with a military uniform, dog tags, and enough flexibility to strike a pose or take a fall. Kids could swap out his gear, helmets, rifles, backpacks, even scuba suits, and send him off on missions across the living room or backyard battlefield. It was the height of the Cold War, and Joe reflected that tension, but filtered through a child's sense of adventure. Over time, he evolved into a whole universe of characters, vehicles, and storylines. But those first editions were pure, iconic, and endlessly played with. G.I. Joe was a soldier, a sailor, an adventurer. He climbed trees, dove into mud puddles, and slept in shoebox barracks. For many boys growing up in the 1960s, he was the first toy that truly felt like theirs. He was more than plastic. He was valor, imagination, and action rolled into one heroic pose. And every kid who owned one remembers how it felt to gear him up for battle. There were no signs, no trails, and definitely no cell reception. Not that it mattered. The hidden fishing hole Dad always took you to might as well have been a secret passed down through generations. You had to park on a dirt shoulder, hop a barbed wire fence, and walk through brush that snagged at your socks like it wanted you to turn back. But then, there it was. A quiet patch of water framed by trees and pure silence. No people, just frogs, the buzz of dragonflies, and the occasional splash of something just out of sight. Dad would hand you a rod, already rigged, and say, "Let's see if they're biting today," like it was a ritual. He always had a story about the one that got away, usually involving a fish the size of your leg and a broken line. You never saw it, but you believed him. And on the days you did catch something, even if it was just a bluegill the size of a cookie, he would hoot and holler like you had just pulled up Moby Dick. You would sit there side by side, quiet except for the occasional snack or Dad humming an old tune. But if you want to hear about the reward after a good fishing trip, let me take you to the drive-through dairy farm. Glass bottles, cold milk, and maybe even ice cream. Neon everything was not a trend. It was a takeover. Shirts, socks, shoelaces, scrunchies. If it could be worn, it could be neon. Bright pinks, electric greens, yellows so vivid they could stop traffic. Walk into a classroom in the 1980s, and you might see a dozen students glowing like highlighters. It was not subtle, it was not sophisticated, but it was unforgettable. Neon made sure you were seen from across the street, or the roller rink. Entire outfits were built around one blinding shade. And the braver kids, they mixed them. A neon blue shirt with neon orange shorts and lime green shoelaces. Why not? Matching was optional. Visibility was everything. Neon told the world you were loud, proud, and unbothered by what anyone else thought. It showed up in birthday parties, aerobics tapes, and mall photo booths. Looking back now, it seems like a color explosion. But that was the magic. Neon was confidence in color form. It was youth, amplified. It was chaos, celebrated. And for those who wore it without a hint of irony, it was the brightest part of a decade that refused to dim. Before the sleek inline skates of the 1990s, there were the clunky, lovable roller skates with metal wheels. They strapped over your shoes with thick leather buckles and screeched across every surface like they were mad at the floor. If you skated indoors, you sounded like a marching band. If you braved the sidewalk, every crack was a threat. But none of that mattered. Because once you got going, it was freedom. You were flying, wobbling, yes, but flying. These skates had no padding, no ankle support, and no mercy. But they came with memories, rolling through driveways, circling the garage, racing your siblings until someone wiped out. You remember the sound they made on concrete, the clatter as you tried to stop, the feeling of falling and getting back up anyway. Roller discos made them iconic. Kids and teens glided under colored lights, surrounded by Bee Gees and Donna Summer, feeling cooler than they ever had. You might have never mastered the spin. You probably fell more than you want to admit. But those skates, those metal-wheeled monstrosities, were the soundtrack to a whole chapter of growing up. They were heavy, loud, and impossible to forget. Bugles arrived in 1966, and with them came a whole new shape of snacking. Shaped like tiny trumpets or cones, they were the snack you could eat or wear. Kids popped them onto their fingertips, wiggled their hands like claws, and then crunched them down one by one. But the novelty was not just in the shape. Bugles had a distinct texture, light, crispy, and a little flaky, that made them feel different from chips or pretzels. The corn-based flavor was salty, a little buttery, and oddly addictive. Unlike many snacks of the era, Bugles were not trying to copy something else. They were their own thing. Whether poured into a bowl for a party or packed into a lunchbox for recess, they brought a certain crunchy cheer to any setting. Parents liked that they were baked, not fried. Kids just liked that they were fun. Bugles became a staple of 1960s snack shelves alongside pretzel rods and Fritos, but they stood out for their playfulness. Even now, decades later, slipping a Bugle onto your finger sparks a flash of childhood. They were silly, satisfying, and one of the few snacks that doubled as a costume. The local train tracks were not on any map of attractions, but they might as well have been your Saturday headquarters. Dad would pull up to that familiar patch of gravel beside the crossing, engine off, thermos in hand. Steam curled from the lid as he poured black coffee like he was settling in for a movie. You sat on the hood, knees pulled up, eyes scanning the horizon. Then, clack, clack, clack. The first rumbles came. A distant whistle echoed across the fields, and the train rolled in, all muscle and thunder. Dad would nod like he timed it himself, and the counting began. 1, 2, 3. Boxcar after boxcar, faded logos, rust streaks, some tagged with graffiti from cities you had never seen. Sometimes you brought a notebook, sometimes just your eyes, but you always left with the same question. Where were they all going? Dad would lean back against the car, sip his coffee, and tell you a story that may or may not have been true. It did not matter. What mattered was the rhythm, the waiting, the wonder. And if you were lucky, the next stop was just as legendary. A miniature golf course where no obstacle was regulation, and every putt told a story. Stirrup Pants were the 1980s attempt to combine fashion with function, and they did neither particularly well. These leggings had a strap that looped under your foot, supposedly to keep them from riding up. In reality, they pulled awkwardly at your ankles, made your feet sweat, and caused socks to bunch in weird places. But we wore them anyway. They came in bright colors, bold patterns, and every synthetic material known to mankind. They were stretchy, shiny, and often paired with oversized sweaters or blazers that made no logical sense. From the knees up, you looked like a school principal. From the knees down, you looked like a gymnast caught mid-warm-up. But Stirrup Pants had their moment. They were the go-to outfit for school picture day, mall trips, or just feeling like you belonged in a fashion catalog. The loop under the foot made you feel oddly secure, like your pants were holding onto you. Sure, they sagged in weird places. Sure, they made your calves look like sausages. But they were a staple, loved, mocked, and deeply missed. For anyone who wore them, Stirrup pants were more than a fashion choice. They were a commitment, a stretch of spandex, and a rite of passage. Before Bluetooth speakers and streaming playlists, there was the FisherPrice record player, and it was a masterpiece of childhood simplicity. You wound it up with a chunky white knob and placed a thick plastic disc on the turntable. It clicked into place, and when the needle dropped, the magic began. Out came twinkly, music box-style versions of nursery rhymes, folk songs, and lullabies. The songs were short, cheerful, and unforgettable. The discs were colorful and clunky, with molded ridges that somehow produced melodies. It did not matter if the sound was a little warped or off-key. You were in control. You had your own music machine. For many kids, this was their first experience playing music, and the pride that came with it was unmatched. You could stack your favorite discs. You could play the same one on repeat until it drove your parents up the wall. And the best part? No batteries. Just your hands, your ears, and your imagination. You did not need to understand how it worked. You just needed to hear that familiar click, feel the turn of the crank, and know that something sweet was about to happen. It was low-tech joy in a beige plastic box, and it never stopped playing in our heads. Twister was the game that got people off the couch and tangled in each other's limbs. Released in 1966, it came with a plastic mat covered in colored circles and a spinner that decided your next move. Left hand red, right foot green. Before you knew it, you were stretching across the mat in a precarious pose, face pressed against someone's knee, hoping no one slipped. It was silly, physical, and weirdly intimate. Some parents called it indecent. Some schools banned it. But kids loved it. So did teenagers. It broke the ice at parties, sparked laughter between siblings, and gave families something active to do together. It was as much about falling over as it was about winning. The rustle of the mat, the sound of giggles as someone toppled, the concentration in trying to stay upright, it was all part of the fun. Twister took no prep and delivered instant chaos. It did not care about strategy. It cared about balance, luck, and how far you could stretch without collapsing. And for many, it was the first time a game made you move, laugh, and fall down all in one messy, unforgettable moment. The community swap meet in the church parking lot was a patchwork quilt of folding tables, lawn chairs, and a whole lot of neighborhood hustle. It was always held early, way too early, and Dad would pull up with a thermos of coffee and a plan. This was not a place for big spenders. This was a battlefield of bartering. He would go straight to the tables stacked with transistor radios, old tools, and that mysterious plastic bin full of tangled cords that might be useful someday. You were eyeing the table with the mismatched action figures and board games missing all the pieces. There was always one guy who sold nothing but velvet Elvis paintings. No one ever saw him set up or pack up. He was just there. The swap meet had its regulars. The Tupperware lady with 1,000 lids and no matching containers. The comic guy who only sold back issues from 1974. And the woman with jars of jelly that looked more suspicious than sweet. But Dad? He moved through it all like a seasoned pro, chatting with everyone like they were old buddies, walking away with something bizarre like a mini fan or a set of ceramic pigs, and when he said, "Let's stop by the junkyard real quick," you knew things were about to get even stranger. Shoulder pads were not just a trend, they were a transformation. You could put on a blazer and suddenly feel like a corporate warrior, even if you were just headed to homeroom. The goal was to look powerful, confident, and vaguely like a football player on a job interview. From business suits to casual blouses, shoulder pads invaded every piece of clothing in the 1980s. You could not escape them. They were sewn in, velcroed on, or added as an afterthought to make your silhouette scream important. The bigger the pad, the better. Entire generations walked around with squared-off shoulders and structured poise, looking ready to charge into a boardroom or a runway. Some tried to remove them only to realize the entire shirt deflated without the padding. They were ridiculous, and we knew it. But they worked. You stood a little taller, felt a little braver, and if someone bumped into you in the hallway, your outfit absorbed the blow. Looking back now, they seem comically oversized, but at the time, they were armor, fashion armor. And for anyone who wore them, They were a reminder that style was not just about looking good, it was about looking like you meant business. In the 1970s, you could walk into any living room and find a macrame plant hanger swaying near the window. Handmade from twisted cords, thick yarn, or even old rope, these hangers were more than decoration. They were statements. Your mom or aunt probably made one at a craft night or picked one up at a flea market. They cradled ferns, spider plants, and anything green, sometimes hanging over orange shag carpeting or wood-paneled walls. Some had beads woven into the strands. Others had patterns that seemed to hypnotize you if you stared too long. They were often hung with a brass hook screwed right into the ceiling, dangerously close to ceiling fans or light fixtures. But no one cared. It was groovy. It was artistic. It was freedom and nature brought indoors. The macrame craze represented a return to earthiness and personal touch. You were not just buying a product, you were tying every knot yourself. And if you were not making one, someone you knew definitely was. These hangers aged, gathered dust, sometimes sagged under too much weight, but they were beloved. They matched the houseplants perfectly and brought warmth into every room. Seeing one today might feel like stepping into your grandmother's sunroom on a quiet afternoon, the scent of potting soil and lemon-scented furniture polish in the air. Fondue parties were peak 1960s sophistication, cheesy, communal, and irresistibly fun. Imported from Switzerland and embraced by American hostesses everywhere, fondue turned dinner into an event. Friends gathered around bubbling pots of melted Gruyere or Emmental, long forks in hand, dipping cubes of crusty bread into molten gold. It was interactive, slightly exotic, and made conversation flow almost as much as the wine. The fondue pot itself became a household item, sleek, colorful, often gifted at weddings. There were rules. Do not drop your bread in the pot, stir in a figure eight, and keep the cheese smooth. Some added white wine or garlic, others experimented with chocolate fondue for dessert. Either way, the evening was about more than food. It was about sharing, laughing, and leaning in, literally and socially. In an era that embraced kitsch and community, fondue was a perfect fit. It brought people together in a circle, turned dinner into performance, and gave every guest a role to play. Long before tapas or charcuterie boards, fondue was the original shareable meal. For those who remember the scent of wine and cheese wafting through a mid-century living room, it was a flavor and feeling that defined the times. The miniature golf course with homemade obstacles was never part of a chain. It was part of someone's backyard that got out of hand. The fence leaned, the AstroTurf peeled at the corners, and the scorecards were photocopies from sometime around 1967. But to Dad, this was sacred ground. "Watch out for the windmill," he would say, pointing to a lopsided contraption that spun more out of habit than engineering. Hole 6 had a dinosaur, once green, now a sad grayish blue with a missing eye, and hole 9 was uphill into what looked like a mailbox from a sci-fi movie. Dad kept score with one of those tiny pencils, sometimes generous, sometimes forgetting that penalty stroke. He cheered every shot like you had just qualified for a Masters tournament, and when he sunk a hole in one, he would raise his hands like he had won a trophy. The best part? Ice cream sandwiches at the end, slightly melted from the cooler behind the counter. You never asked for anything more. But if the ground game was that magical, just wait until you went airborne, watching planes take off from a sleepy little airport that felt like your own private runway. Boombox battles turned sidewalks into stages and backpacks into speaker cabinets. In the 1980s, carrying a massive boombox on your shoulder was more than a way to listen to music. It was a declaration. You had style, you had taste, and you had batteries heavy enough to power a small city block. These machines blasted everything from hip-hop to hair metal, and they did not ask for permission. You walked down the street with your soundtrack trailing behind you, volume all the way up, head nodding to the beat. Some kids parked them at basketball courts. Others lined them up outside corner stores. Whoever had the best bass usually won the crowd. Tapes were traded, dials were turned, and sometimes spontaneous dance-offs broke out right there on the pavement. Boomboxes were heavy, awkward, and impossible to ignore. But in a time before smartphones and Bluetooth, They were portable pride. They made noise. They made statements. And if you saw someone approach with a fresh cassette in hand and a boombox on their shoulder, you knew something good was about to happen. Boombox battles were not just about the music. They were about being seen, heard, and remembered. Weebles were strange. Round, egg-shaped, plastic, and slightly hypnotic, they had one job: to fall and get back up. And they did. Every time. Weebles wobble but they do not fall down was not just a slogan. It was a promise. You pushed them. You tilted them. You stacked them. But no matter how hard you tried, they would not tip over. Their secret? A weighted bottom that made them bounce right back. And as a kid, that felt like magic. They came in all kinds. Clowns, animals, astronauts, families. Some had little playsets. Others stood alone like tiny toys with superpowers. They were cheerful, durable, and weirdly comforting. Even as a toddler, you sensed their message. Things might get rough, but you bounce back. Parents loved them because they were safe. No sharp edges, no small parts, no batteries to replace. Kids loved them because they were unpredictable. You would roll them across the kitchen floor or try to trap them under Tupperware bowls. They were indestructible. They were eternal. And while you might not think about them often now, if you saw one today, you would probably smile. Because those little plastic figures taught you more about resilience than any book ever could. Plastic sofa covers were not a suggestion. They were a law. If your grandparents or parents had a couch they loved, you can bet ice cube trays were cold, clunky, and unforgettable. Before plastic trays and automatic ice makers took over, these heavy-duty aluminum trays were the standard in American freezers during the 1960s. They had a removable divider with a metal lever that cracked the cubes free with a satisfying snap. But it was not always smooth. The handle sometimes stuck. The cubes often splintered. And if your hands were wet or too warm, the metal could stick to your fingers, something you only did once. Despite the fuss, there was something almost ceremonial about making ice. You filled the tray carefully, slid it into the freezer with steady hands, and waited. Hours later, you lifted the lever, twisted the tray, and heard that sharp mechanical crack as the cubes broke loose. It was noisy, it was physical, and it was reliable. Drinks were never the same without it. Whether you were filling a glass of Tang, cooling a cola, or preparing a highball for company, those chunky, slightly imperfect cubes were part of the experience. Today's ice makers are quiet and effortless, but they lack the charm and the muscle memory of prying open one of those stubborn metal trays. For many, it is a sound and struggle that still lives in the back of the mind. The flea market at the county fairgrounds was not just an event. It was an ecosystem. Hot pavement under your feet, the smell of popcorn mixing with motor oil, and a wall of voices haggling like they were at a medieval bazaar. Dad had a game plan. He always did. First, a lap to scout. Then back around to make the real choices. You wandered behind him wide-eyed, marveling at tables full of license plates, rusted tools, vintage comic books, and a surprising amount of questionable homemade jerky. One guy sold nothing but bumper stickers with sayings that would get you sent to the principal's office. Another had rows of toy yo-yos. And even though Dad warned you, you begged for one anyway. It broke in 5 minutes, maybe 6, but you still carried it around like it was gold. There was always a booth with used records blaring classic rock through dusty speakers, and Dad would flip through the crates like he was searching for buried treasure. Every once in a while, he would hold one up and say, "Now this is music." You did not argue. Not when he looked that happy. And if you thought flea markets were a lawless land of loose change and sunburns, just wait until you hear about the go-kart track that somehow never got shut down. Television antenna adjustments were part of the evening routine, just like brushing your teeth or fighting over the remote. Before streaming, before digital signals, there were rabbit ears, 2 shiny rods that stood on top of the television like alien feelers. Getting a clear picture meant twisting them in random directions, adjusting one while the other stayed stubbornly out of reach. Sometimes you needed to stand on one foot. Sometimes the only way to get the signal was to hold the antenna yourself and stay there, frozen, arm extended, human satellite. Someone from the couch would yell, "Right there! Do not move!" And you would stay stuck in position, sacrificing comfort for clarity. Foil was added for better reception. Coat hangers became tools of innovation. And if the weather was bad, good luck. The static would return like an uninvited guest. It was frustrating, yes, but it was also communal. Families worked together to solve the mystery of the fuzzy screen. You cheered when the picture came in. You groaned when it disappeared mid-show. Antenna adjustments were the dance of analog television. Awkward, unpredictable, and always a little magical when they actually worked. Mood rings promised to read your soul. Slip one on, and suddenly your finger was a window into your emotions. Or so we thought. The magic came from a tiny, color-changing stone set into a thick metal or plastic band. It shifted hues depending on temperature, but as kids, we believed it told the truth. If it turned blue, you were calm. If it went black, you were angry. Green? Maybe in love. We studied those little charts that came with the ring like they were sacred scrolls. Every recess and sleepover had at least one person interpreting moods. Sure, the science was sketchy, and sure, it mostly just reflected how cold or hot your hands were, but to us, it was real magic. It felt like the ring knew something we did not. Every kid had one, lost one, or begged their parents to buy one from a gas station or gift shop. The band turned your finger green eventually, but you wore it anyway. It was a talisman, a tiny crystal mood detector that let you feel seen, even if it was just a gimmick. To this day, nothing quite compares to the mystery and wonder packed into one shimmering, shifting little stone. If this brought back even one memory you thought was gone, tell us in the comments, give this video a thumbs up, and hit subscribe so we can keep rewinding the past together.